I'm here today with Kendra Alexander, and she is an integrative health and hormone coach and a bereavement loss doula. Welcome, Kendra. I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Would you mind sharing your story?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. So I would say it kind of starts back in 2019 time. I, me and my husband had been married for a year and we decided we were ready to try for pregnancy. We were ready for the next step. And I had missed some period and went to the doctors and I knew that probably something wasn't right. I felt imbalanced anyways. I had been on birth control for many years and the doctors just said I could stop taking it. So I didn't know that it could, lead to imbalances by the way I stopped taking it. And I went to the doctors after about 3 months of no period and I wasn't pregnant and learned I had low progesterone and high estrogen dominance. And from there, they didn't really give me any guidance. It was more on my own type of situation. And so I just started researching my my character, researches everything to feel like I understand a little bit better. So I quickly realized that hormonal imbalances aren't forever. You can work with them, you can balance, you can go out of balance, back into balance. And so I was relieved to hear that it was possible to shift my lifestyle. And so from there, I started addressing, the most immediate things was that I shifted my diet to be more, maybe less sugar, less caffeine, less things that were going to get me stressed, like in a stressed mindset. Stress, that's like, a huge thing for me. So I spent in the same time that I was repairing my hormones and my lifestyle, we were trying. And so that was, we tried for like 14 months, 16 months before we got our first positive. And, in that time, I must say, when I was coming up on a year of trying, my doctor was kind of still in the mindset of like, oh, just chill out and have fun and keep trying. Don't think anything of it. Meanwhile, like they always say, if you've been trying for over a year, that's when we can help you. So, I was very unsettled. After about 16 months, we got pregnant and it was probably, it was like week 5 or 6. I knew very early on because when you're tracking everything, you just know all the dates and times. So it was probably like 5 weeks in. The pregnancy was very, very painful from the start. And I didn't know anything else. So I thought that was normal. And I started getting brown spotting. And yeah, you look that up online and that's terrible. So I don't recommend looking things up on Google. So I made an appointment. I had one coming up and they didn't seem to think anything of it. So they made me wait probably like 5 or 6 days. And I got there and the bleeding didn't get worse, didn't get better. It was just kind of still there. And they pulled me in the room and she had like a student room with her. And she was like, meanwhile, the doctor was very pregnant herself. She was like, so it can be one of two things. You can be very early, it can be spotting, which I knew it wasn't because tracking, I just knew. and she's like, it can be ectopic. So she briefly ran over ectopic, which is like the scariest pregnancy you could experience. Like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, you could lose a fallopian tube and you could die
Yeah.
first. So she kind of was just like, oh yeah, whatever, you know. And I knew from having hormonal imbalances, I knew that I had been on progesterone before. And so I was like, is that an option to like, because progesterone is what keeps your, holds in the baby in
Mhm.
your uterus. And so sh- I said that. I said, maybe progesterone, and they actually laughed at me
Mm.
and they said, that's just a band-aid. And so really giving me no answer or anything. I went home and I don't remember if it stopped. I don't think it stopped, but it didn't get any worse. But I had to, so that was like, I think 5 weeks to confirm pregnancy, and they didn't confirm it. Um, at that point, she just kept saying, you're too early. And so I was like, okay. And it was a couple of weeks later, it still was kind of, happening on and off. And I called a lot, and they just kind of led me on the whole time. And finally got to, I think it was the 8-week appointment. And I had like, the whole pregnancy was so painful. And it was like an aching in one spot. Like I could feel it the whole time. It was quite torturous. And the more I read, of course, the anxiety got, and it just snowballs when you're just afraid the whole time. And so I had so much fear. I don't even, it was like a month. Slept like a couple hours a night. So I was just so in my head and terrible. And the morning of, I had an ultrasound appointment and I woke up and literally it was just like pretty heavy bleeding and it was red, not brown. And I knew that it was possible, but you're kind of in denial. It's all trauma. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of not really thinking about that. And we get to the doctor's office and they do because I'm so early, they kept saying they did a vaginal probe instead of over my belly to find the sac. And they were doing that for 25 minutes or more. It
Oh,
felt like
wow.
forever. Very painful. And
Yeah.
my husband was in the room with me and it was just so traumatic from the start. Nobody was speaking. She stopped, like looking, left the room, left us, left us there without any information, and probably made us wait for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then 4 doctors come in, or a nurse and a couple doctors, and I'm hysterical at this point. No, it's not good when they make you wait and there's no bleeding and, you know, no reassurance. And actually I was like crying, and one of the women in the room, one of the professionals, she was like, why is she crying?
Oh gosh.
Just growing into this terrible treatment.
Yeah.
It was so cold and just so uncompassionate that, you know, I, from even now, I still don't have a great trust with professionals due to that experience. Um, and I didn't realize it in the moment, but she did tell me that the heart, they couldn't find a sac, wasn't a viable pregnancy. In my shock and trauma, I didn't hear that. So when we left, I was kind of under the impression, oh, we're still just waiting.
Mm.
And, my biggest fear was, still ectopic because it wasn't disproven. They
Mhm.
found something in they said it could have been a mass or like a cyst. And I had actually had this dream in all my insomnia that the sac or the whatever you'd want to say it was like in the beginning of my fallopian tube. And it actually was right in the spot where I could, like, where I dreamed about it. Was, I was
And
very,
probably what was causing the pain.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
It was crazy. And I left that appointment that day and, we're like in fear and that we didn't realize what they had said. And I get home and probably half an hour later, I had very, very intense
Mm.
contractions. And I will say, fast forward to when I was in labor with my son, the PTSD from that miscarriage triggered so much in my birth because
Yeah.
the contractions were the exact same.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't diminish at any point where you're at in miscarriage or your loss or anything, you know, it's real. And I literally essentially gave birth. Those
Yeah.
contractions were so intense. And I'd never felt anything like that before. And I was just, it happened and I was at home and I didn't lose a fallopian tube. So it was a very bittersweet mix of relief and total and absolute devastation because I lived through it. I didn't die. I didn't move body parts, but I lost the dream. So, we lost the baby and then I called the hospital and she said, okay, you can try again next month.
Oh. Mm.
Yeah. And this was a
Yeah.
reputable
Yeah.
medical place. And
Yes. Oh. Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, I think that that experience is so relatable because I think so many women go through it and you get in the middle of it and you start to the diagnosis sinks in and then there's no information about what's going to happen next. Here you go ahead and birth your baby literally on your bathroom floor and then you're supposed to just get over it and just move on and continue on. So, how did that experience or I guess did that experience really inspire you to become a loss doula?
well, the obvious compassion, literally. And when I finally was set up with my OB that carried me through my labor with my son, and she instilled so much hope. And I think it was from feeling hopeful and wanting to give compassion to others where I didn't receive it, that and just be wanting to, should help the family members too, because it affects, it
Oh,
affects my mom and like everybody in your circle, like, and you don't realize it because you're trying to grieve too, but
yeah,
it affects everybody. So
it
yeah.
does. It sure
Yeah.
does. And when you were talking, it made me think a
Mhm.
lot too about the hormonal changes and just different things that you did as you were trying to conceive. And I know you're a wonderful advocate for PCOS.
Mhm.
So, how did that enter into your story and what kind of experience did you have with PCOS?
Well, I knew of it. I didn't know much about it until after my miscarriage. I knew that my loss was not just because, and I wasn't okay knowing and feeling like it just happened sometimes. So I changed doctors, which was very necessary. And I had missed it was like 3 periods, just like how the cell started with, I missed cycles. and that is a symptom of PCOS. So she did new blood work, and I don't think it was anything different than I had had many of times to my knowledge, but she heard me and cared and listened to my symptoms, and I had a miscarriage and, all these things. And so she was like, "You have PCOS, and this is how we're going to get pregnant, and this is how you're going to keep your baby, and it's going to," she just, from the minute she said PCOS, she also brought hope. But looking back, I think that I had PCOS symptoms since I was like 15, maybe earlier. The blood sugar,
I
I
guess,
wasn't.
yeah, I guess for maybe we should need to pause for 1 second and
Mhm.
just have you explain, like, what is PCOS? What does it stand for? In case anyone doesn't know.
Yeah, polycystic ovarian syndrome, disorder, dysfunction. It is a very complex disorder. So when they test you for it, there's certain symptoms you have to have I guess, to qualify as having it, but you don't have to be affected the same way as another person. So I can speak from like the insulin resistance. That's definitely what one of the layers. It kind of mirrors like metabolic disorder. Your risk for miscarriage with PCOS is 3 times greater. Everything is a little bit higher through you know, reproductive years. And I really wanted to become an advocate for it because people throw it around like they're like, "I have PCOS, but I'm not concerned until I start trying." And I'm like, if you can learn and you can't cure it, doesn't go away, but you can live with it. And it's not, it doesn't have to be a, curable diagnosis. But if you can condition your lifestyle to work with it, you will live a much happier, healthier life in general. So, you know, not waiting until you're trying, because when you don't know things about it, it can end in loss. So,
Because it wasn't something that you knew prior to becoming pregnant, but
no.
I mean, and we can't speculate, what the
Mhm.
outcome would have been had you known all of that
I
because
know.
it probably wouldn't be any different. But maybe just going into it a little healthier, and it's a great thing if you do have any of those symptoms to know and to get
Yeah.
checked out.
A common one that women see, I don't have this, but the facial hair
Mm,
and irregular period,
yeah.
PMS, the less, there's a lot of symptoms that can definitely,
Which are tricky because a lot of them are regular
I
symptoms.
know.
Yeah. And I think it all comes down to having an honest conversation with your doctor. Hopefully your doctor is someone who listens, and that could lead to being more educated and finding out a little bit
For
more
sure.
about it, what you can do. You talked too about your family and how much the loss affects your family.
Mhm.
How did you navigate your marriage
Mhm.
afterwards? What were things like?
I say one thing I will say, right after it happened, we definitely gave each other space.
Mm,
I, I don't think either of us were strong enough to be a rock and support. So I just remember being like, I'm going to give him his space. He's going to grieve differently than me. And I'm going to, do the same. And I'd check in with him if I felt like I could handle it. But ultimately, as much as that was both of us, I felt like I had failed. I felt like I couldn't provide the thing that I was supposed to. So, that was a lot of me getting in my head negatively and he never led me to think any of this, but
Mm,
what we do, we attack ourselves because we feel like, it's our fault. And I feel like it definitely brought us closer, but also in a sad way when we did get pregnant. We were both in denial, or not in denial, but unconnected for a while because of what we went through. But in my relationship personally, he had this way of making me laugh through anything. So that was literally the best medicine that I could have ever had. We had just gotten a dog. So I think loving another living thing with a lot of help for sure. Yeah.
yeah, it's such a hard thing to understand is that
Mhm.
you you do grieve totally different over the
Mhm.
same loss. It's
Mhm.
essentially the same loss to each of you. It's still each
Mhm.
of your child, but the way that you go about it is very different, and it can sometimes be even more isolating because you don't have your person to lean
I
on
know.
all the time.
It's a really good point. Yeah, definitely. Um,
Um,
but it like going forward, it was kind of sacred because he was the only one that knew what I went through firsthand.
mm, yeah.
So, and I was just praying through the whole thing, let it bring us closer, not further apart.
Yeah, we had a little joke in our house, like, no one else would want us with our baggage at this point. We're the only ones who know about this baggage, and we know how to carry it, so we're just gonna stick
That's
it out.
true.
Um, and I would just, I think too quickly talking about relationships and other people in your life, one thing that you and I share is that we're in the beauty industry,
Mhm.
and that has its own set of challenges due
Mhm.
to the nature of the business. So what was that experience like for you going back to work after your loss?
So I feel like I only took 1 day off,
Oh,
and I looking back, oh my goodness,
yeah. Yeah.
I should have took way more time, but also I did feel like I could. So there was also that pressure to get back to normal in a setting when because I work at a resort, I see new clients like every hour, for like 8 hours. So one thing that has always been interesting to me is like when people ask such big questions to a total stranger. Do you have kids? Do you want kids? Are you married? Which is like all the points of like,
Yeah.
they're big and there's a lot to unfold there. And I would get that question. I think it was like tattooed on my forehead, ask me if I have kids. Because every hour it felt like years, through my whole journey. So at first it was kind of innocent. And, when I was still trying, it was fun to daydream about. But, as the months went on, it was like harder and harder. And then after my loss, it was like every time I was asked the question, I had to relive the trauma of, no, I don't have kids, but I did just lose one.
Mhm.
So it's hard to keep it together. So I would start avoiding. I think I would leave the conversation immediately away and just focus on them. I think that was my tactic because I couldn't, there were days where I couldn't even speak about it, or days where I was never as honest as I wished I was. So a lot of people didn't even know. So
Interesting. I created a script,
yeah,
right? It was the basics. It was just enough for them to not ask questions, but without giving it all away. It was exhausting. And I
yeah,
can't imagine one day. I can't imagine
I know.
just one day. So yeah, yeah, that's a tough one. So as an integrative health coach who specializes in hormones, what do you want people to know about taking care of your hormonal health, paying attention if they're either post loss or wanting to conceive again?
I feel like you have to prepare for a much different experience. The innocence and wonder, it's not really there anymore. In our case, she literally handed us a calendar and said, and we conceived Clomid, which was an ovulating, stimulating drug. But so it takes the fun out of it. But, after you have had a loss, it's not really fun anymore. I mean, so to speak.
It's never the same, for
No,
sure.
it's really not. I think my number one thing that I knew was I needed to work through the emotional part and process. I had to go through it before I could say I'm ready to try again.
Yeah.
And I think that was 3 or 4 months. And when we were able to conceive successfully, that was at the 5 month mark. And I still could have gone a couple more months.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like I needed somebody to hold my hand and tell me we were going to do this or I
Yeah.
wasn't going to do it.
Yes. You either have to
So,
jump right back in. I agree that's how it was with me too. I knew for myself I either had to go right back in or not at all.
yeah,
And I knew I wasn't ready to let it end that way.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
that we have a guarantee of anything
Um,
ever, but,
yeah. I, and I would say I didn't get attached to what the outcome would be.
mm,
Cause, experiencing a loss, you've lost the worst thing that's happened.
mhm,
Totally. So you can kind of detach from the possibility of it happening because it did. So it's a much, more vulnerable, you feel very vulnerable experience
yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, why don't you go ahead and finish with your happy ending? You now have a little boy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we, like I said, my doctor, she just gave me the hope and said, this is how it's going to work. And here's what you do this next month with Clomid. And by a miracle, it worked for us. But so first month we got pregnant and I was on progesterone until I was 14 weeks pregnant. So I find it ironic that the saying that the miscarriage experience when the doctor said it was a band-aid, that was the thing that,
That was exactly what you were
yeah.
prescribed.
Yeah. So in my pregnancy it was hard at first to accept it. And we were disgusted and waited a very long time to tell people. And people didn't understand that. But I think that's one of those things where to each their own. But if it had happened again, it would be very hard to do it with everybody knowing. But yeah, he's here. He's, incredible. So
Such a blessing for
I
sure.
know. Mhm.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh. Any last words of advice or wisdom that you would want to tell someone?
I think this experience, it was isolating for me. And I would just want to share with other women, you don't have to do it alone.
Mm,
There are people like me who want to help you, who want to
thing.
instill the hope that you don't have, that you're not, some days you're not capable of even thinking that way. And it would be very nice to have to, if I had known about coaches, I would have hired one in a second for sure.
Yes.
But just don't lose hope. And your story is going to look much different than the next person. And we're all unique and you're not alone in your loss and you don't have to be alone. And if you don't feel supported or safe or, some relationships fade away due to an experience like this, just don't. And it's not your fault. So
Mm, beautifully said. That's amazing advice. So where can people find you if they're
Mhm.
interested in more working with you or learning more about what you do?
So my business is called Bravely She Blooms Wellness, and I'm mostly on Instagram, but I do have a private Facebook group that I will share with you. And you could join there. And I do have on my Instagram, I have a option to set up a discovery call so we can connect and see if we would work well together and if I could help you move forward through your experience with coaching. And I am about to finish. I'm about to become a coach next month and a doula. So everything finishing and happening
Nice.
all at once. So yeah, just reach out and I help as best as I can.
Things are happening. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Well, Kendra, thank you so much for coming here and being so vulnerable and willing to share your story. And I know it'll really resonate so much with so many people and give them the hope that you found that eventually led you to your sweet boy. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.